The massive halls of Galactic University gleamed under the twin suns of planet Blue. Through its crystal corridors, a group of excited students hurried toward Lecture Hall 7, their various appendages clutching data tablets and sample containers. Today was special, the first day of preparation for their unprecedented exchange program to Earth. Professor Gray stood at the front of the hall, his silvery skin reflecting the morning light. He adjusted his atmospheric stabilizer and looked at the eager faces before him. Some had scales, others had tentacles, and a few glowed with bioluminescence, but all shared the same excited expression about their upcoming adventure. Earth, Professor Gray began, his voice calm but firm, is unlike any world you have studied before. Its gravity, atmospheric pressure, and biodiversity make it unique in our known galaxy. At the back of the hall, Rock shifted in his reinforced seat. His massive frame, nearly twice the size of his classmates, rippled with muscle beneath his protective suit. As the son of the greatest warrior of the blue planet, he found it hard to believe that such a primitive world could pose any real challenge. "Professor," Rock called out, his deep voice carrying across the hall, "I've read that Earth creatures are mostly soft-bodied and lack any significant armor. How dangerous could they really be?" A few students turned to look at him. Rock's friend Leaf, a slender being with skin like autumn foliage, gave him a worried glance. She had learned long ago that Rock's confidence often bordered on dangerous arrogance. Professor Gray smiled patiently. "An excellent question. Let me show you something." He activated the holographic display, and the image of a tiny Earth creature appeared in the center of the hall. This is what Earth humans call a spider. Specifically, a Brazilian wandering spider. Rock couldn't help but laugh. The creature was smaller than his smallest finger. Several other students joined in his amusement. "This particular spider," Professor Gray continued, unperturbed, "contains enough neurotoxin in one bite to kill several beings your size, Rock. And it's not even the most dangerous of Earth's small creatures." The laughter died down. Rock frowned, his pride slightly wounded. "Our bodies are designed to resist any form of attack. We can withstand impacts that would shatter Earth's strongest materials. Surely a tiny bite couldn't harm us." "That's precisely the kind of thinking that makes Earth so dangerous," Professor Gray said, switching off the hologram. "You see, Earth evolved differently from most worlds. Instead of developing just physical strength or armor, many of its creatures developed chemical weapons, poisons and venoms that can bypass physical defenses entirely." Leaf raised one of her branch-like arms. "Is that why Earth is classified as a death world, Professor?" "Partially, yes. But it's more complex than that. Earth's variety of life forms, its extreme weather patterns, its active geology, all these factors have created organisms that survive in ways we're still trying to understand." Rock crossed his arms, his metallic skin catching the light. "My father always says that true strength comes from facing challenges head-on. I look forward to proving that we're stronger than any Earth creature." Professor Gray's expression grew serious. "This isn't about proving strength, Rock. This exchange program is about learning and understanding. Earth has been part of the galactic community for less than a decade, and we still have much to learn from their world." He turned to address the entire class. "You'll be staying at a research facility in what Earth humans call Australia. The facility has strict safety protocols that you must follow at all times. No exceptions." The professor spent the next hour going through safety procedures, emergency protocols, and basic Earth survival guidelines. Rock only half listened, already dreaming of the stories he would tell about conquering Earth's challenges. Beside him, Leaf took detailed notes, occasionally glancing at her friend with concern. As the class ended, Professor Gray made one final announcement. "Remember, we leave in 3 days. Earth's gravity is stronger than what you're used to, so make sure your enhancement suits are properly calibrated. And please, review all the safety materials I've sent to your tablets." The students filed out of the hall, chattering excitedly about their upcoming adventure. Rock walked confidently, his heavy footsteps echoing in the corridor. "This will be interesting," he said to Leaf. "Finally, a chance to show everyone why our people are the strongest in the galaxy." Leaf watched him go, a sense of unease growing in her core. She had a feeling this exchange program would teach them all some unexpected lessons, whether they wanted to learn them or not. The Earth's sun felt different from the twin suns of Planet Blue. Rock stood with his classmates outside the Australian research facility, his enhancement suit working harder than usual against the planet's stronger gravity. The air smelled strange, rich with organic compounds that his sensors struggled to identify. "Welcome to Earth," said Dr. Smith, a human scientist who stood before them wearing the standard white lab coat of their species. She was much smaller than any of the alien students, yet she moved with confidence under the natural gravity. "I'll be your guide during your stay here." Rock studied the human with interest. Their species looked so fragile, with their soft skin and lack of natural armor. He couldn't understand how they had survived on such a dangerous world. "Before we enter the facility," Dr. Smith continued, "we need to go through decontamination and safety protocols. Earth's biosphere is unique, and we need to protect both you and our specimens." The students followed her through a series of airlocks. Each chamber sprayed them with different compounds that Rock's suit identified as disinfectants. He found it amusing that such precautions were necessary for creatures so small. "This seems excessive," he whispered to Leaf, who was walking beside him. "What could possibly harm us in here?" A human assistant walking nearby overheard him and smiled. "Last week, we had to evacuate an entire lab because someone found a funnel-web spider in the break room." "A spider," Rock said loudly, drawing attention. "Like the one Professor Gray showed us. You evacuated because of that." Dr. Smith turned to face the group. "Yes, we did. And that's exactly the kind of respect for local wildlife you all need to develop. Size doesn't determine deadliness here on Earth." They entered the main research area, a vast space filled with secured habitats and monitoring equipment. The walls were lined with warning signs and emergency equipment. Rock noticed that even the smallest specimen containers had multiple security locks. "This facility houses some of Earth's most dangerous creatures," Dr. Smith explained, leading them past rows of sealed terrariums. "We study them to understand their biology and develop better treatments for their toxins." Leaf pressed closer to the glass of one container, her leaf-like appendages trembling with excitement. Inside, a small colorful frog sat on a branch. "This one looks beautiful," she said. "That's a golden poison frog," Dr. Smith said. "One of the most poisonous creatures on Earth. A single touch could be fatal, even to species as physically robust as yours." Rock stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the tiny amphibian. "That's impossible. Our skin can withstand acid strong enough to dissolve metal. How could touching this tiny thing harm us?" "Would you like to see the test results?" Dr. Smith asked, pulling up a holographic display. "We've done extensive research on how Earth toxins affect various alien physiologies. The results might surprise you." The display showed detailed molecular structures and their effects on different types of cellular structures. Even Rock had to admit the data looked impressive, though he still had his doubts. "Now," Dr. Smith said, closing the display, "let's go over the safety protocols for specimen handling. Rule number 1. Never, under any circumstances, attempt to handle specimens without proper authorization and supervision." As she spoke, alarms suddenly blared in a distant part of the facility. Red lights flashed, and several human researchers ran past their group. "What's happening?" Leaf asked, her colors shifting with anxiety. "Code yellow in Lab 7, a voice announced over the speakers. "Possible box jellyfish containment breach. All personnel clear the area." Dr. Smith's expression remained calm, but her voice carried added weight. "And that, students, is why we take our safety protocols so seriously. Now, please follow me to the secure observation room while our containment team handles this." As they hurried away, Rock watched the human emergency response team rushing toward the affected area. They moved with practiced efficiency, showing no fear despite the danger. For the first time since arriving on Earth, he felt a slight tremor of doubt about his assumptions. Maybe, he muttered to himself, this world is more interesting than I thought. But he quickly pushed the thought aside. After all, he was still convinced that nothing here could truly threaten someone of his species. He would prove it. He just needed the right opportunity. The next day, Dr. Smith led the alien students into a special collection area of the facility. Thick safety glass separated them from a controlled jungle environment, where researchers in protective suits carefully gathered specimens. Today, you'll observe how we collect and handle one of Earth's most notorious arachnids, the Brazilian wandering spider, Dr. Smith announced, bringing up a live feed on the main screen. Rock leaned forward in his reinforced chair. Finally, he would see this supposedly deadly creature that Professor Gray had warned them about. On the screen, a human researcher gently guided a brown spider into a clear container. The spider looked almost comically small compared to the thick protective gear the human wore. That's it. Rock couldn't help but laugh. That tiny thing is what everyone's so worried about. Dr. Smith tapped her tablet, and new images appeared on the surrounding screens. This is footage from our testing facility. Watch carefully. The first video showed the spider's venom being tested on various materials. Even Rock fell silent as he watched the neurotoxin eat through substances he recognized as nearly indestructible on his homeworld. But that's just materials, Rock argued, though his voice carried a hint of uncertainty. Living beings are different. Next clip, Dr. Smith said quietly. The screen showed a time-lapse of the venom's effects on different cellular structures, including samples from various alien species. In each case, the results were devastating. Leaf's colors had turned pale. How does it work? She asked, her voice trembling. The venom contains a complex mixture of toxins, Dr. Smith explained. But the key component is a neurotoxin that affects the nervous system. It doesn't matter how strong your muscles are or how tough your skin is. Once it's in your bloodstream, physical strength becomes irrelevant. One of the other students raised a tentacle. But surely our enhancement suits protect us. They do, Dr. Smith nodded, as long as they're properly maintained and worn correctly. However, she paused, bringing up another image. These spiders can bite through most standard protective materials. That's why we use specialized gear when handling them. Rock shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The data was impressive, but his pride wouldn't let him fully accept it. Has anyone ever survived a bite? Yes, with immediate treatment. But even then, the effects can be. Dr. Smith brought up one final video. It showed a recovery room where a large warrior-like alien species, similar to Rock's people, was going through physical therapy. The once mighty being struggled to perform even simple movements. This was a military officer who ignored protocols during a training exercise 3 years ago, Dr. Smith explained. He survived, but the nerve damage was permanent. He can no longer serve in active duty. The room fell silent. Even Rock had no quick response. A soft chime interrupted the heavy atmosphere. On the main screen, they could see the collection team securing their specimens. Each spider was now safely contained in a specialized habitat, multiple locks engaging automatically. The fascinating thing about these spiders, Dr. Smith continued, her voice taking on a tone of scientific curiosity, is that they're not even the deadliest creatures we have here. They're just the ones we're studying this week. Rock watched as the containers were transported to a secure storage area. Each box was marked with multiple warning symbols, and the security systems tracked their movement through the facility. It seemed excessive for such small creatures, yet something about the humans' careful precision made him uneasy. Questions? Dr. Smith asked, looking around the room. No one spoke. The students were still processing what they'd seen. Even Rock, usually quick with challenges or comments, remained thoughtfully quiet. As they filed out of the observation room, Leaf noticed Rock staring at his hands. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. "Of course," he said quickly, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. I need to check something in the research archives." That evening, Rock spent hours studying Earth's wildlife database. But the more he learned, the more his certainty wavered. Every answer led to new questions, and each piece of evidence challenged his deepest beliefs about strength and survival. Yet somewhere in his mind, a dangerous thought was forming. Theory and data were one thing, but real proof, that would be something else entirely. Rock paced back and forth in the facility's common area, his heavy footsteps echoing off the reinforced floors. For 3 days, he had watched his classmates grow increasingly fascinated by Earth's tiny terrors. It was unbearable. Every conversation now centered on how dangerous these small creatures were. "I can't take this anymore," he announced suddenly, making several students jump. "We need to prove once and for all what these Earth creatures can really do." Leaf, who had been studying nearby, looked up with alarm. "What are you suggesting?" "A controlled test," Rock said, his voice carrying through the room. "Let's request a proper demonstration. My species against their spider. In a controlled environment, of course." The room fell silent. Even the human researchers at their monitoring stations turned to stare. "Absolutely not," Dr. Smith's voice came from the doorway. She walked in, tablet in hand, her face stern. "That kind of test is strictly forbidden." Rock turned to face her, drawing himself up to his full height. "Why? If these creatures are as dangerous as you claim, wouldn't a proper demonstration help prove it? Under safe conditions." "The safety board would never approve it," Dr. Smith said firmly. "We don't conduct tests on sentient beings. Period." "Then how can you be so sure about the effects?" Rock challenged. "All we've seen is old footage and data. For all we know, those could be exaggerated." One of the human researchers, a young man named Tom, stepped forward. "The footage you saw was real. I was there when that military officer was bitten. Trust me, you don't want that demonstration." Rock's metallic skin gleamed as he tensed. "On my world, we have a saying. Truth is found in action, not words. How can we learn if we never test our limits?" "There's a difference between bravery and foolishness," Dr. Smith said quietly. "True strength isn't about proving you can survive danger. It's about knowing when to respect it." "Easy for you to say," Rock scoffed. "Your species is so fragile, you have to respect everything. But we're different. We're built for combat, for survival." Leaf moved to stand between Rock and Dr. Smith. "Rock, please, remember what Professor Gray said. This isn't about proving strength. It's about learning." "Learning?" Rock laughed bitterly. "All we're learning is fear. Look at everyone. Yesterday, Jun screamed because she saw a regular Earth house spider. It wasn't even venomous. That's called a sensible response to an unknown creature," Dr. Smith replied calmly. "Something you might want to consider." The tension in the room grew. Other students watched nervously as Rock and Dr. Smith faced each other. Finally, Rock spoke again, his voice low and controlled. "I want to formally request a controlled demonstration. I'll sign any waivers needed. Take it to your safety board." Dr. Smith shook her head. "The answer will be no. And let me be very clear. Any attempt to circumvent these rules will result in immediate expulsion from the program and potential criminal charges." Rock's eyes narrowed. "So that's it. We just have to take your word for everything." "No," Dr. Smith said. "You have to accept the evidence we've already shown you. Sometimes, the wisest choice is learning from others' experiences rather than insisting on making your own mistakes." The standoff lasted a few more moments before Rock turned away. "Fine. Have it your way." He stormed out of the common area, his heavy footsteps fading down the corridor. Leaf watched him go, her colors shifting with worry. She knew that tone in his voice. It was the same tone he used right before doing something incredibly reckless back home. "Dr. Smith," she said quietly, I think we should increase security on the specimen storage area." Dr. Smith was already typing on her tablet. way ahead of you," she said grimly. "But something tells me it won't be enough. Keep an eye on your friend, Leaf. I have a feeling he's not done with this yet." As if to emphasize her words, a distant door slammed, the sound echoing through the facility like a warning. The facility was different at night. Emergency lights cast long shadows through empty corridors, and the quiet was broken only by the soft hum of life support systems. Most of the staff and students had retired to their quarters, but Rock was wide awake. He stood in his room, checking his enhancement suit's systems one final time. The security codes he had secretly copied from a careless researcher's tablet felt heavy in his memory. His father had always taught him that sometimes you had to break rules to prove the truth. Security systems show normal activity, he muttered to himself, watching the facility's monitoring feeds on his datapad. The night shift guards were making their usual rounds, following their predictable pattern. Rock waited until the guards passed his section, then slipped into the hallway. His heavy frame, usually so difficult to move quietly, now moved with surprising grace. Years of combat training had taught him how to control every movement when needed. The specimen storage area was 3 levels down. Rock took the maintenance shafts rather than the main elevators, avoiding the regular security patrols. His suit's cooling systems worked harder as anxiety built up inside him. "This is ridiculous," he whispered to himself. "All this security for a tiny spider." But even as he said it, a small voice in his head that sounded surprisingly like Leaf warned him to turn back. The specimen storage door loomed before him, its warning signs glowing red in the dim light. Rock entered the first security code. The door's first lock disengaged with a soft click. Second code, another click. Third code, the final lock released. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing rows of secured containment units. Each one glowed with its own internal lighting system, creating an eerie blue landscape of shadows and light. Rock moved carefully between the rows, reading the labels. Box jellyfish, blue-ringed octopus, inland taipan. Finally, he found it. Brazilian wandering spider. The containment unit was smaller than he expected. Inside, he could see the spider sitting quietly in its habitat. It looked so harmless, so insignificant compared to him. "Time to learn the truth," Rock said, reaching for the unit's control panel. His fingers trembled slightly as he input the final security code. Warning lights flashed on the panel. A soft computerized voice spoke. "Warning. Containment breach protocol initiated. Please verify authorization." Rock hesitated for just a moment. He could still walk away. But the memory of everyone's fear, their absolute certainty that even he couldn't survive this tiny creature's bite, pushed him forward. "Authorization override," he said, using the code he had memorized. The containment unit's seal broke with a soft pop. Everything happened very quickly after that. The spider, disturbed by the sudden change in its environment, moved with incredible speed. Rock barely saw it move before he felt a sharp pain in his hand, right at the gap between his suit's glove and arm segment. "That's it," he said aloud, almost laughing with relief. "That's what everyone's so afraid of." Then the pain began to spread. The security cameras captured everything that happened next. They recorded how Rock's legs gave out first, sending him crashing to the floor. They showed how he tried to reach the emergency alert button, but couldn't coordinate his movements. They documented the moment when his respiratory system began to fail, and his enhancement suit's emergency protocols activated. The facility's alarm systems erupted into life, their urgent wailing echoing through every corridor. Emergency response teams in full protective gear rushed into the storage area, finding Rock convulsing on the floor. "Get the anti-venom," someone shouted, "and contact the medical team. We need emergency transport now." As darkness crept into the edges of his vision, Rock finally understood. It wasn't about size or strength or armor. On this deadly planet called Earth, even the smallest creatures had evolved weapons that could bring down the mightiest warriors. His last conscious thought was of his father's words. True strength is knowing your limits. Too late, he had learned his. The emergency medical bay of the facility had never been so crowded. Doctors and specialists from 3 different species worked frantically around Rock's massive frame, which now lay motionless on a reinforced medical bed. His enhancement suit had been partially removed, revealing skin that had turned an alarming shade of gray. Temperature rising. Called out a human doctor. We need to stabilize him before the next dose of anti-venom. Leaf pressed against the observation window, her colors cycling through shades of distress. Behind her, Dr. Smith spoke urgently into a communication device. Yes, sir. We need the experimental countertoxin from the Sydney lab. His system is fighting the regular antivenom. No, sir. We can't wait for standard approval. He has less than 2 hours. The facility's director stood nearby, looking grim. The military transport with his father will arrive in 40 minutes. Let's hope Rock lasts that long. Through the observation window, they watched as Rock's body convulsed again. The medical team rushed to hold him down, but his species' legendary strength, even in this weakened state, made it difficult. Equipment crashed to the floor. We're losing him, someone shouted. Neural patterns are becoming erratic. Leaf couldn't watch anymore. She turned away, only to see Professor Gray hurrying down the corridor. He had arrived via emergency teleport as soon as he'd heard the news. How bad is it? He asked, his silvery skin dulled with worry. Bad, Dr. Smith replied quietly. The venom is affecting him differently than our models predicted. His enhanced physiology is actually working against us. His stronger immune system is attacking the antivenom. A commotion at the end of the corridor drew their attention. A massive figure in ceremonial armor strode towards them, flanked by military escorts. Rock's father had arrived. The legendary warrior's presence filled the hallway, his armor gleaming under the emergency lights. But when he spoke, his voice carried none of its famous battlefield authority. Only a father's fear. My son, he said simply, moving to the observation window. How did this happen? Dr. Smith stepped forward. Sir, Rock broke into our secure storage area and... I know what he did. The warrior interrupted. I want to know why we couldn't prevent it. Why we couldn't protect him from his own pride. Before anyone could respond, alarms blared from the medical bay. Rock's vital signs were crashing. His father pressed a hand against the window, watching helplessly as the medical team fought to save his son's life. Sir, a young human doctor emerged from the medical bay, looking exhausted. We need your authorization. There's an experimental treatment, but it's never been tested on your species. The risks. Do it, Rock's father said without hesitation. Whatever it takes. The next hour was the longest of their lives. The experimental countertoxin arrived via high-speed drone. The medical team worked tirelessly, adjusting the treatment as Rock's body reacted to each new attempt to save him. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, his vital signs began to stabilize. He's going to live, Dr. Smith announced to the group in the hallway. But, she hesitated. But what? Rock's father demanded. The neurological damage. We won't know the full extent until he regains consciousness. His enhanced healing abilities might help, but this venom, it attacks the nervous system in ways we're still trying to understand. The warrior looked through the window at his son, now lying still and pale on the medical bed. Tubes and monitors connected him to various life support systems, technology that their species rarely needed. He wanted to prove how strong we are, Rock's father said quietly. Instead, he proved something else entirely. Leaf moved to stand beside him. What did he prove, sir? That strength without wisdom is just another kind of weakness. The warrior turned to Dr. Smith. When he wakes up, I want him to see the security footage. Every moment of it. Some lessons must be learned the hard way, but they must be learned completely. As if in response, Rock's fingers twitched slightly on the medical bed. The first sign of consciousness, and the beginning of a very different kind of education about Earth's creatures. 6 months after the incident, Rock stood before a new group of alien students at Galactic University. His movements were slower now, more deliberate, and a slight tremor in his left hand revealed the lasting effects of the spider's venom. But his voice was strong as he addressed the class. "I was like many of you," he began, activating the holographic display. "I thought strength meant being the biggest, the toughest, the most physically powerful. Earth taught me how wrong I was." The security footage from that night played behind him. The students watched in silence as they saw Rock break into the facility, saw the moment of the bite, and witnessed his collapse. None of them laughed or smiled. The fear in their eyes showed they understood the gravity of what they were seeing. "The spider that bit me weighed less than 1 gram, Rock continued. "Its entire body was smaller than my smallest finger. But it carried enough venom to nearly kill me, and to permanently change my life." In the back of the lecture hall, Professor Gray and Dr. Smith watched with approval. This presentation had become a mandatory part of the Earth Exchange Program orientation. Rock's father had insisted on it, saying his son's experience should serve as a lesson for others. "Earth is different from any world you've studied," Rock said, moving carefully across the stage. "Its creatures didn't evolve to be the biggest or strongest. They evolved to survive. And in doing so, they developed weapons more powerful than any natural armor or enhanced strength." He held up his trembling left hand. "I can no longer serve as a warrior like my father. The nerve damage from the venom made sure of that. But I found a new purpose. I now work with Earth's scientific teams, helping them study and protect these remarkable creatures." The hologram changed to show various Earth species: spiders, snakes, tiny frogs, and seemingly harmless plants. Each of these has evolved defenses that can bypass any physical protection. They don't care how strong you are, how advanced your enhancement suit is, or what species you come from. They simply exist, demanding respect not through size or strength, but through the simple fact of what they are. Leaf, who had joined the research team with Rock, stepped forward with a sealed container. Inside, safely secured behind multiple layers of protection, sat a Brazilian wandering spider, possibly even the same one that had bitten Rock. "This isn't about fear," Rock explained, looking at the spider with a mix of respect and understanding. "It's about wisdom. Earth's humans learned long ago to respect even the smallest of their world's creatures. It took me nearly dying to learn the same lesson." He touched a control panel, and the hologram showed scenes from his current work: Rock helping to catalog new species, working with protection programs, and teaching other aliens about Earth's wildlife. "Some of you will soon visit Earth. When you do, remember my story. Remember that true strength isn't about proving you're better or stronger than other creatures. It's about understanding and respecting the incredible diversity of life in all its forms." The presentation ended, and the lights came up. The students sat in thoughtful silence, their previous assumptions about strength and power visibly shaken. Later, in the research facility's common area, Rock sat with Leaf, watching new students arrive for their first day of the exchange program. "Do you ever regret it?" Leaf asked quietly. "What happened that night?" Rock watched as a young alien student carefully followed safety protocols before entering the facility, showing none of the arrogance he had once displayed. "I regret my pride," he said slowly. "I regret not listening to those who tried to warn me. But the lesson itself." He looked down at his trembling hand, then back at the students. "That lesson probably saved more lives than my warrior career ever would have." Through the window, Earth's sun was setting, casting long shadows across the facility's grounds. Somewhere in the growing darkness, countless small creatures were going about their lives, neither knowing nor caring about the great impact they had on the galaxy's understanding of true strength. And Rock, once the proudest warrior of his people, now stood as living proof that sometimes the greatest lessons come from the smallest teachers.